Hey guys, Billy here with Beabyte. Easy Mode Ultra will be a little different today. The crew and I react to Nintendo news, Paris Games Week, and Halo 5. But before we get to that, this is a conversation with the creator of Cibele, a newly released game based on a true story about love, sex, and the internet. We think Cibele is great, and you can get it right now on Steam and save 15%. This is Easy Mode Ultra, episode 18. Enjoy. Nina Freeman, thank you very much for being with us today.
No problem.
You're a game designer, you're a writer, a poet, it seems like, as well.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. But you started, can you talk a little bit about when you figured out, like, hey, I really want to make video games. This is a thing I want to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I mean, I've always been like into games, grew up playing games, have always loved games. Kind of realized that people were making them when I have two best friends from when I was younger who went to college for game design. And I was like, oh, people do game design. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But it kind of just was like in the back of my mind for a really long time. And so when I was in college and undergrad, I was doing a lot of poetry, and that's sort of what I was doing for a while. I'd actually meant to go in for acting, but became more interested in poetry. And that was at Pace University in New York City. So I, finished my undergrad in English and was really, really involved in the New York City poetry scene. And at the end of my college career, I kind of started working at this job in the New York City Department of Education, and it was really great, but like it wasn't really what I wanted to be like doing with my life necessarily.
Right. Okay.
So I graduated and was like thinking about like, what do I want to do next? And so I basically started grad school right away, but in sci-fi literature. So my undergrad thesis had been in sci-fi poetry.
Very nice.
And while I was doing that, I was like in the sci-fi lit master's program, and like I found that I was like writing more. I kept trying to write about games because like, obviously in literature classes, like you can write about games because often games can be, like there's stories in games and lots of writing.
Right.
So you can kind of approach them from like a
Definitely.
literary criticism perspective.
Yeah.
And I had started to do that towards the end of my undergrad, and then I started doing it more in grad school. And I even started to intern at Kill Screen, which I did during that time. So I was slowly like kind of getting more involved in games, and I was like, oh, I want to be a games writer. But then I met some people who were actually making games, and I was like hanging around with them a lot, specifically Emmett Butler and Diego Garcia, Emmett's working on Cibele with me, and
Right.
Diego worked with us on Bum Rush, our recent no quarter game.
Okay.
So I've I've known them for a while. They were making a game called Heads Up Hot Dogs, and I would like go hang out with them every weekend while they were working on it. And it's this iPhone game they did with Adult Swim.
Nice.
And it was really cool to watch them, like just to like be in the background, like watching them make something like that.
Yeah.
And it sort of made me realize, like, oh yeah, like I remember my friends from childhood went to school for game design, like these guys are making games, like, oh, people make games. And it kind of clicked for me. And I was like, I wonder if I could like take what I've learned from poetry and apply it to games. Cause like, I've always been really into like narrative games and story-based games.
Right.
And obviously like, I played a ton of Final Fantasy Online, and I kind of got into that because I was like a huge fan of Final Fantasy in general.
Dude, yes, that's a big thing for me as well. And I want to go back on one point you made, how you wanted to cross sort of poetry and game and game writing. I think there's a lot of people that want to do that. And personally for me, like I went to school as an undergrad and I majored in creative writing.
Cool.
So I do a lot of writing myself, and then I took a year off to kind of explore different things, and I went back to school. I'm doing my master's now in creative writing.
Cool.
And writing for games is really interesting. You've obviously written a couple of games now. I actually didn't know you had so many games before Cibele, but it's really cool and really interesting to think about. And for you, was it more of the, like you said, like the narrative focus? And how did you sort of take poetry and then turn that into game design? Or how does that work?
Yeah, for me, it's less like poetry as a craft that I carried over. Like I still write poetry, but writing poetry for me is like it has similarities to making games, but ultimately it's pretty different.
Yeah.
I think what I ended up taking over from poetry was more like so for me, when I was studying poetry, I was really interested in like the New York School poets and like, and somewhat the Beats and other people that were writing around that time that were writing more personal stuff.
Yeah.
So like the people I always cite who aren't necessarily New York School, I don't think, but are Langston Hughes and Elizabeth Bishop, plus
nice,
all the
yeah.
New York School people.
For sure.
And like they write a lot of like very personal poetry that's like very clear about like ordinary people sort of in these ordinary situations. And that was always the kind of thing I found compelling in poetry. So when I was writing a lot of poetry, I was writing a lot of personal poetry about my own life and like the things I was doing on a daily basis.
Yeah. So not a lot of poetic epics then, I guess, huh?
Yeah, not really.
Okay.
Definitely not my thing.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it has its place, but I've always been more interested in the like vignette style personal stuff.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. Have you played Child of Light?
No, I have not.
The dialogue in that game is really interesting because everything is written in iambic pentameter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
that's cool. That's a big challenge.
It is. It's really interesting. You should check it out. That's one of the only games I think where they sort of implemented poetry in that way. And I just thought it was
check that out.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to Final Fantasy 11 a little bit, I kind of wanted to just sort of honestly like shoot the breeze here and talk about that crazy game because for me, I played that game for like a really long time. I started in like 7th grade, went throughout high school, then I graduated high school, and then I was like my first couple of years in college. I even dabbled a little bit, and what was interesting about that game was I kept on going back to it. Probably because maybe this is true for you too, but probably because of the people I met. And I started playing that game at a time when I was sort of just learning different social things. Obviously, like 7th grade is like when you're going through all these changes. You're going into becoming like a young adult and things like that. So I learned for me when I got to the end of Cibele. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Cibele.
Okay. I've heard someone else say Cibele.
Yeah, people pronounce it in lots of different ways, but my original pronunciation that I learned was Cibele, so I stick with it.
Okay, cool. Cibele. So yeah, when I beat Cibele, you wrote a little thing that says, Final Fantasy 11 sort of shaped that game, shaped yourself. I just wanted to talk like, how long did you play that game yourself?
Yeah, I started when I was 14, and I played until I was probably 19, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, from like middle school through college, or through my freshman year of college. Right. So yeah, very long time.
What was your job? Your main job, sub job?
Oh yeah, I played. So I was on the Sylph server, and I played. I guess my main like long-term job was Black Mage.
Okay.
And then later on, I leveled up Ninja and Dancer.
Nice.
But Black Mage was really like I did all endgame stuff. I did was Black Mage. I did some Ninja later, but like it was kind of a joke when I did it. Because I had like a very tricked out Black Mage that I had developed over like years, as you probably know how
got all like the relic armor and like all this other stuff.
I had like +1 relic armor. Ooh, I had like crazy stuff.
Fancy.
Yeah, I had a lot.
Dude, no, yeah, I played so much too, but I guess I was like on the opposite end of that, where I played a ton, but I didn't like get anywhere because we just hang out. It was basically like a very expensive and very fancy chat room for me. Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, that's definitely what it was for me for the most part. But I got really sucked into like end game link shells and like that whole kind of structure.
It's so crazy. I think do you take anything? Maybe you do. From playing Final Fantasy 11 and sort of implementing that into your own games?
I mean, well, at least for Cibele, like you were saying, the reason I played it for so long in retrospect was like because of the social elements and because like I grew up and like my early social experiences were all in Final Fantasy 11. So it was like my entire social life. And I mean, I had a social life in school and in real life too. Like I wasn't the type, even though I played constantly, like it didn't really take over my life.
Right.
Although it kind of did in a way too.
Yeah.
It's arguable. But yeah, like for Cibele, I wanted to reflect that where like basically it's just this grindy game, but really she's there to like talk with this guy, and like you can also like see her chatting with her other friends.
Yeah.
So it's definitely more about the social aspect, which was kind of what inspired Cibele. And I don't think design wise, like I think MMOs are really interesting, but I'm not like an MMO designer. I'm definitely at the moment more interested in just like pretty linear narrative vignette style games, which I mean, I'm sure Final Fantasy Online had an influence on my design practice somehow, but I don't really know how.
Okay.
Right now.
Did you ever get into 14? Because 14 came out when 11's still going on, I think. So
yeah, it's still up.
Are you into 14 at all, or do you play any of that?
I like got into the beta test or whatever for that game, and I really, really liked it. But that came out when I was in grad school, so I didn't have time to like play.
Oh yeah.
But sure. my two best friends from childhood who like went to school for game design and stuff, we had discovered Final Fantasy Online together, and they, or at least one of them, I think they both played a lot of it, but one of them definitely like plays a lot of that game, or at least did for like a while. So like I still have like connections into it, but I don't play it like myself actively.
Yeah. For me, it's like this, when I think of Final Fantasy 11, it's almost like, I don't mean to put the game down. I think the game's pretty cool, but it's like almost like a dark time. In like my own life, it's like the way an addict almost thinks about whatever they're addicted to, it seems like, and there's a lot of that goes on, especially with like MMOs and perhaps other multiplayer games. But I played Final Fantasy 11 for so long, and like I share the same sentiment, where it's like that was the defining social aspects of my life when I was younger, and I learned, again, I learned so much too at the same time, because our Link Shell had older folks. Our Link Shell had weirdly like a lot of like almost drama,
Oh yeah, they always did.
And that was just really odd to me, and never since then have I had any type of gaming experience that was even close to replicating that. And I wanted to get your thoughts. Like, I wonder why that is. How come it was only Final Fantasy 11 that did that?
I mean, I guess none of it, in retrospect, like none of it's very surprising to me, just because like when you're like within a structure that like kind of makes you like be around a specific group of people a lot for like an extended period of time. Yeah, you're just naturally a lot of social dynamics are gonna like erupt from that, like the drama and the friendships and the relationships and stuff. Like it's just like people are gonna be people no matter like whether it's mediated by technology or like in person. Like people are always gonna like socialize and stuff. Right. So I think it makes a lot of sense. It's just like another context through which people socialize, right? Yeah, like those games are basically built to be like, whether or not, I don't know like what the designers intended, but they're basically built to be like just a little like place where you go to like hang out, right? So it's like basically in my mind the same as like, oh, you go like hang out at this park every day after school, right? Like it's kind of like the same sort of thing, but it's online. And that obviously has sort of a different stigma, where a lot of people are like, oh, but like socializing on there is like, it's like not normal, or it's different or something. And maybe that was kind of the stigma that it had when I was growing up. Maybe it's different now.
Yeah, but
I think the social stuff is the same regardless, because it's all just about context.
Yeah. Do you think, just a real quick one, like, do you think online, like being social online and even like online dating has evolved since your time in Final Fantasy 11?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely very different, mostly because people are just more like comfortable with the idea, and it's become more like normalized. Like it's a part of culture now that's not like, oh, it's only for like, dudes in their basements or whatever, like derogatory thing that you would say about it like in the early 2000s. Yep. Now it's like everyone has Tinder on their phone or whatever. Man, so it's like this total normal, it's like just a thing that people do now. So, it's just going to become more and more a part of like daily life, I think, as time goes on.
All right, so before we move on from the topic of Final Fantasy 11, I always had this sort of, I always wondered, how the hell do you pronounce some of these names in Final Fantasy 11? So there's that island, Kazam? Or was it Kazam? What was it for you?
I called it Kazam.
Okay.
Because there's an H after the Z, right? So I was like, I'd try to pronounce the H and it would come out Kazam.
Kazam. Okay.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I'm probably wrong.
Yeah. Kazam. That was a big one. And then is it Lathane or Lathine?
Oh, I always said Latine.
Oh man.
Yeah.
There's so many different variations.
I'm sure they said them in some of the cutscenes, but I like never watched any of them. Really.
Were there any? I don't think there was any voice acting. Maybe that was after my time.
Oh wait, yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. I'm totally projecting that. I don't think there was any.
we heard voices in the cutscenes for sure.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I was in TeamSpeak the whole time, so I was hearing voices.
Yeah, and then is it Ronfar or Ron4 Forest?
I always said Ron4, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's so many.
Right.
There's big debates on these, but there's that's what always interested me, like, because it was such an online. It was only an online game, right? And for me, I didn't really meet anybody in person, and I wasn't really big on TeamSpeak either, so I would like never know how to correctly pronounce these things.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of my knowledge of that stuff would come from because I was on TeamSpeak constantly when I played that game.
For sure.
So.
All right, so moving on, Final Fantasy XI inspired Cibele, your game that's releasing, I think, next week, the 2nd?
On Monday.
Yeah. Releasing next week. And one of the big things was I was really surprised at how sort of raw it is. And obviously this is basically yourself in a game, playing a game, so it was like this kind of like gameception thing going on.
A game about playing a game.
Yeah, it was a game about playing games, and it was just from the opening scene. You know, it's like a real video. It's not like a CGI video of you logging in, playing the game, and then as a player, you're playing the game. And that like almost broke my mind a little bit. I had to stop and think about what was going on. And that was just, I've never experienced anything quite like that. It reminded me a lot of like the Stanley Parable in those types of sort of commentary games. And and there's some points, some spots in the game where obviously I don't know if I should refer it to as like Nina the character, or I should say you, or like what's...
You can say character.
Yeah,
that's usually what I do because it's easier.
Yeah, like the character has a lot of real, it's just real. It's like you're looking into someone's computer, and for me, it was like, oh man, I shouldn't be like reading these chat logs. I shouldn't be like going through all these folders and photos and things like that. And as a player, it felt almost like it was discomforting, or like I felt uncomfortable, like I was, doing something I wasn't supposed to. Was that intentional for you?
Did you feel that way? I'm going to ask you a question for answer. Did you feel that way through the whole game, or like by the end, did it feel pretty natural?
By the end, I think all that stuff kind of like went away, and it was just kind of devastating to see the character like, oh man, like it didn't work out for her.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Basically the goal with the game, like what I'm interested in as a game designer, is player character embodiment.
Yeah.
In other words, like I'm interested in making games that help players step into the shoes of a character that is not themselves.
Yeah.
So the goal of Cibele, obviously, like you were saying in the beginning, it felt kind of like you were like being a voyeur in a way, right?
Yeah.
But the goal is like, of course, people are going to feel like that right away because there's a whole cultural stigma against like, you're not going to like take someone's phone and look through it, like they're going to get angry, right?
Right.
And the game is sort of like kind of doing that. But it's not really, because it's saying like, no, you are Nina and you're playing this game as her. So that is your computer and you have total control over looking through it. It's while you're playing, it's your computer.
Right.
So yeah, the goal is that like through the course of the game, you'll kind of ramp up until you feel like you're playing as that character, and you won't feel like you're a voyeur anymore because you are that character, and like this is your space that you're exploring.
Right. That's very interesting, actually. Now that I think about it, but it was just something I hadn't experienced in a game before, and it was almost like jarring. It's like, whoa, this is so real. It reminded me of like if you read a book, like a first person like memoir or something like that. And I was wondering, this is kind of like an autobiographical game, right?
Yeah, I've been using the term based on a true story, just because autobiographical sounds kind of clinical almost, and like it's 100% true. But like it's based on true things that did actually happen, but obviously, like, I
Right.
can't remember exactly what I said in the
Uh-huh.
moment of, like, throughout this game. So it's definitely still authored, but yeah, it's all based on true events.
And it's pretty cool too because you sort of incorporate and doing a little research on you acting, photography, like writing, things like that. I imagine this is just like super fun for you to do because it kind of incorporates everything that you like.
Yeah, it was definitely fun to make, and like I'm lucky that I had a lot of like I didn't do the films myself, obviously. Like she was like my friend from college who works in film, and she filmed the short films, and like I was lucky to have a lot of like really cool collaborators who could help me out with that stuff. But it's like, I mean, it's not like I'm probably not going to make another game with film, maybe ever, if not for a while, because like it wasn't really. It's not that I'm like super hyped on like film and games. It's just that it made sense for this game because it's really explicitly about like embodying this human, and like I wanted players to be able to know exactly who they're playing as. So like it was important for me to like show the person, and I think like I could have had like an animator do like stylized animations of it, but it wouldn't have felt as real as it does given that I use all actual photos and stuff. So like I had to match the style of like using real photos and scans and like real world objects. And of course you can also do that with like stylized art, but I saw an opportunity to actually just use film, and that kind of like also made it simpler for me. I didn't have to like, art is hard to produce, but so are films, but it was just like an interesting opportunity to like do that.
Right.
So
by the end of the game, we talked about that a little bit earlier, like Nina, the character, it doesn't really work out for her, and I believe that's probably the most interesting things because that's representation of like real world relationship possibilities. And I read this Polygon article where you wrote a year ago, I think, and you're talking about how it's important to represent or realistically represent relationships and sex within video games. How important is that to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to me. I think for me, first and foremost, always comes like that I want to write honest characters, like regardless of like whether it's about sex or something else.
Right.
Like I just want to write things write people. If I'm writing about people, write people that feel like they are real, like they could be your friend or someone you know or you. So obviously, not every relationship has a happy ending. So like. That's one way of like, that's one kind of relationship to represent. And I wanted to represent that in an honest way. Obviously, some relationships do have happy endings. And like, if I was, telling a story about that, then I would try and represent that in an honest way. And a lot of that honesty just comes with presenting the player with enough context so that like, they understand why this relationship is even happening, for example, and not just focusing on like plot points, to like make an exciting story or whatever. Like I want to fill in all the gaps where it's like things that you would understand about a person from like knowing them, for example. I want you to like come away from a game knowing sort of about the little things so that you can have a better understanding of like how this whole thing played out.
Right. And here is there. With that being said, I feel like there's a deeper problem, not just within games, but just in mainstream media in general, where they don't necessarily depict relationships as realistically as they are. Like, I thought about sort of Cinderella and Prince Charming. Like, at the end of Cinderella, you don't really know if they're going to break up, like, after the credits roll, kind of.
Yeah.
What do you think about that kind of stuff, like mainstream media and how they depict that? Is there a real problem there, you think?
I think when tropes are used, like obviously tropes need to be kind of like looked at critically, because it's really easy to rely on them and just like fall onto like, like you said, like sort of the Disney princess trope, for example. And I think there's also value in those stories because they reflect cultural norms, which are, important to look at. So that it's important work. But it shouldn't be the only kind of work. So I think it's good to have like a variety of kinds of stories represented, whether they rely on like there should be things that have tropes and there should be things that totally defy those tropes. Yeah. And I think having that whole spectrum of stories represented is really important.
Why is it called Vault to Miri?
Yeah. So I wanted to come up with like, I didn't want to use like actual like Final Fantasy Online names
correct.
or whatever because of copyright stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I want to use like cool names that sound like they could be from a Final Fantasy game, just to give that vibe, which is why also the art is kind of like, it doesn't, it's obviously like not hyper real 3D like Final Fantasy games are, but it's got that kind of vibe.
Yeah.
So a lot of the names are. So I'm part Finnish, like.
Oh, okay.
And I have a lot. I identify a lot with the Finnish part of me, and so I like always get excited when I can like use a lot of like Finnish words and stuff in my games when I can. I hadn't really had a chance to do that before Cibele because I don't normally make any games with like fantasy stuff in them or like things that I'm naming that aren't already real things like in my life, real people. So I basically just was like Googling around and trying to find like interesting Finnish words. I should just like Google it really quick. I think Valtameri means sea. I think it means like ocean in Finnish. I'm gonna look it up really quick.
Okay.
I'm blanking out.
Yeah.
Let's see. It means. Yeah, it means ocean.
Ocean.
So. Yeah. So I was like, oh, I remember in Final Fantasy Online there was like sky and sea.
Oh,
and
yes,
I thought it would be cool to have like sea basically be like the name of the online game in Cibele.
Yeah, that's kind of represented in the art style too. Just the opening. Once you open the game, Nina's playing, like the splash screen is kind of wavy and things like that. How much input did you have on the art? I know you didn't do the art personally, right?
Yeah, I didn't. When I have class, I'm like still looking at Valtameri. I'm pretty sure that it is C. I'm like, oh god, if someone listens to this and corrects me, I'll be embarrassed. Whatever, it's fine.
It's not C, it's sky, actually.
Yeah, but that was the idea. Anyway, so the art with my collaborators, generally, I try to give them as much creative freedom as possible. So like my approach is like, here's the tone I'm going for, and like, here are some references, if they ask for them. So the artist kind of asked for some references. And she knew that like I had approached her and I was like, I really like your art style. Like she has a very well-defined style that she's developed. And I was like, I want you to like use your style and like feel free to basically like run with it. And like, here's the tone. And she asked me for references. So I basically sent her a Grimes music video and like a bunch of Sailor Moon screenshots and like videos and a lot of like anime stuff and like I'm trying to remember.
But that stuff's pretty genuine, right? Like you're pretty into that stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean the aesthetic definitely just represents my aesthetic, and also Rebecca, who did the art, like is into very similar things, so like it worked out pretty well.
Is Rebecca?
And also Sofia Coppola movies.
Definitely.
Were a big influence as well.
Is Rebecca Becca in the game? Supposed to be?
She's not.
Okay.
I didn't meet Rebecca until I was like, I think out of college. Like it was like way later. But yeah. Also, her name is spelled a little different. She doesn't go by Becca. She goes by Rebecca. But nice. I can see how that would be, how you would think that.
Yeah, for sure. There was one chat log that stuck out to me. I thought it was pretty funny. I wish I wrote the quotes down, but Cat Meme 5 was really cool. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Cat Beam 5?
Yeah, Cat Meme 5. It was in one of the chat logs. I don't remember, but
I can't even remember either. I wrote like so much for this game.
That person said a lot
Cat Meme. I thought you said Cat Beam.
Oh, no,
sorry.
Cat Meme, yeah. Cat Meme.
Yeah, Cat Meme. Yeah. Yeah, that was... Yeah, all those chat logs were based on real conversations, real chat logs that I dug up.
And so
that was interesting.
Yeah. And I felt like I projected myself a little bit into this game too, because when I was following the story of Cibele and Nina and Ichi, and it's like, man, this guy is a total asshole, and it's just like, there is that type of sort of, I guess, going deeper into the relationships. Like there's that wall, I guess. He says at one point where I don't have to look at you, and it makes it easier for him to sort of navigate through social waters that way because he doesn't have to look at another person. How there's a lot of anonymity that gives internet folks a lot of power, and there's always like that quiet majority and then the very loud minority. What do you think about like that in terms of just the internet in general and gaming culture, like the whole thing with like Gamergate and like all this hate that gets thrown around? Like I personally hate that stuff, but I just want to know like your stance on it, and how can that be fixed?
So first about Ichi, it's interesting. Like people always say different things about him. Some people think he's an asshole, some don't, which I'm happy about because I tried my best to write him to be like a complicated, like not one-dimensional character.
Right. Yeah.
So it's cool to hear people kind of react to him really differently.
Yeah.
Because he's definitely like, it would have been easy for me to like represent him as like some kind of like anonymous troll, but like that's not what he is. He's just like kind of an awkward, like, you know, young dude on the internet.
Yeah.
Like, and there's a lot of people like that. That's kind of like a normal thing. Yeah. And honestly, the Nina character is kind of similar in a lot of ways. But I guess as far as like in the real world goes outside of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like, I think trolling is really shitty, and I think people should just be nice to other people. Treat others the way you would like to be treated, basically.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if I have anything, like, major to say about it other than, like, the internet can be a really toxic place, and it's a huge bummer. So I hope that people can learn from their mistakes and become better people and be nice to others, because that is... that would be a better world if people were more like that.
Yeah, do you think it's just like this thing that just never seems to end. It's kind of outrageous, and I guess I don't know. It's just kind of like the anonymity of the internet gives people so much power, and I feel like there's got to be a way to like sort of offset that, but you know, I guess that's totally another philosophical conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a big question that I don't think anyone has figured out yet, to be honest.
Exactly. Let me see. Going forward, so Cibele releases next week.
Yep.
And there are other games that you've made. You've made a ton. I didn't know actually you made. The game is called How Do You Do It? Mm-hmm. That game is crazy. That game is awesome.
Thanks.
it's like crazy awesome, and I didn't realize it was you. So, but when I figured that out, that was pretty cool. Like, obviously, sex is a big thing. The whole polygon thing as well. Mm-hmm. And I read somewhere that you played Gone Home, and you know that kind of reinforces your sort of game design philosophy as you know, relationships and feminism, things like that. And eventually, you met Steve Gaynor of Fullbright. Could you talk a little bit about how that was? Like, just kind of out of nowhere. Was it really surprising to you?
I mean, so like you said, I've made like a bunch of games now, and like over the last, I guess I've been making games for like 3 years. Over the last 3 years, I've been like really sort of aggressive about like going out to events and like meeting people and like trying to sort of like get my foot in the door, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I didn't, I was in grad school, and I ended up in grad school. Basically, my thesis was making a game. Was making Cibele was like my master's thesis.
Yeah.
And so like throughout grad school and whatever, I was like, I like really want to like meet other developers and like get inspired and go to conferences.
Yeah.
So I was at GDC. I guess it was like not this last GDC, but the GDC before that.
Okay.
I was at it, and I met Steve while I was showing I was showing How Do You Do It in Ladylike at a party. He was there, and he played it and was like really into them. And I had also met Carla that year, just through some mutual friends. And but yeah, Steve had played How Do You Do It in Ladylike and really liked them, and we ended up keeping in touch. And that is just sort of how I ended up at Fullbright, and now I work at Fullbright. That's basically because I showed a game at a party at GDC a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's really crazy. Another question is, you were an English major for your undergrad, and you did sort of game design work for your master's. For those, I feel like there's a lot of people that want to start designing games, and sometimes it feels really difficult. For you, how did you sort of break that barrier?
For me, it's complicated because, like, basically I was, like, working that job I mentioned earlier that I didn't really like, and it was taking up a lot of my time on top of grad school classes. And then, unfortunately, I got, like, diagnosed with this chronic illness, which kind of, like, set my life on, like, a crazy course where, like, I suddenly realized, like, I had to really start taking advantage of, like, whatever I could to, like, accomplish my goals. And I really wanted to figure out what I wanted to do. So that kind of kicked me into full gear, and I was like, okay, I've been thinking about wanting to make games for a while, and now like this like sickness has like turned my life over, so I'm gonna try and like redirect my energies from like being anxious about it to like doing something.
Yeah.
And so I decided to teach myself how to program because I wanted to make digital games and I wanted to code them. And I had a lot of support from like Emmett and Diego, who I mentioned before. And through that, I just kind of like started coding, and I went to a ton of game jams and just like made a ton of tiny things.
Yeah.
All like within a couple months.
Wow.
And within those first couple of months, like, I think we had made, like, the Fist of the North Carp game, and, like, there's just, like, a lot of things that I made, like, right away. So for me, it was just, like, you know, it was, like, kind of an unfortunate circumstance, but I was just, like, I kind of pushed myself to, like, really go to tons of game jams and, like, learn how to code really aggressively.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely like a self-taught kind of person. And then I didn't start grad school until after that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Did you code? Like, did you learn coding through like Code Academy and things like that?
No, I basically just did game jams and like kind of learned from like Googling stuff and like reading other people's code, and just like, you know, I also had support because I had friends who knew code, like I said.
Nice.
Obviously, Emmett, who worked on Cibele, or who was working on Cibele as the programmer, he taught me most of what I know about programming.
That's really cool.
But yeah, just support from people and like Googling, and like I also had like an internship at this place, Craft Coffee, and I was programming there, and then I ended up working at Kickstarter for a little while later as a programmer. So like I had various programming jobs just to like, you know, because I like programming, and like that helped me learn a lot. So I just dove in head first and was like, now I'm going to program all the time.
That's crazy. That's because that's such a, every time I hear like a friend that want to make video games, they're like, I really want to do this, but I don't know how to program.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the only way to do it. It happens to be the way that I did it. But like, there are lots of, you know, Unity doesn't require that much programming. Game Maker requires barely any. Like, there's tools out there that you can use if you really don't like programming. It's definitely not like for everyone, but I think anyone can do it if they really want. It just takes time and applying yourself and sticking with it.
For sure. And our last little topic here, I wanted to touch upon a little bit about Tacoma.
Sure.
What are you're Fullbright now, and you're a game designer. And I also, I've heard that Fullbright's actually a pretty small team, and it's mostly consisting of women, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I forget the exact ratio.
Yeah. How does that change the dynamic? Because there's a whole big thing currently with, you know, women in games and the games industry. Like, I actually watched the Paris Games Week news conference thing. Even that, you know, Sony didn't have a whole lot of women on stage. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, they definitely care about having good representation of underrepresented people in the industry. Like, you know, everyone in the company really cares about that. And what's cool is that they actually have like taken steps to not only like say that they care, but actually like do things that like show that, like hire lots of women. And that's, you know, it's one thing to like talk about diversity in games, and it's another to actually like do something about it. Yeah. So like that, being in that kind of environment where like we all try to be like active about it is like pretty cool. So that feels good. And, you know, obviously it's just like nice to be working with lots of different kinds of people, because I think that you just come up with more interesting stories that way, because there's just many more life experiences represented within the company. So I think, you know, for me, that's like a really good thing. But it's just, you know, it's nice to like be in a space where that kind of thing is like talked about really openly, and is like, you know, people really like support it actively at Fullbright. So it's like a very encouraging environment to be in, for sure.
How big is the team there?
I think it's like 8 people.
Wow, that's crazy. And what are your sort of day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah, so I'm a level designer on Tacoma, and that basically, I mean, that entails a lot of different things. I help out with some writing, sometimes, mostly, lately at least, I'm doing a lot of like, you know, space and flow design of like the levels themselves, like how players will move through the level, planning that kind of thing out. And like also thinking about like what belongs in this level, like what part of the story is happening here. So a lot of just like sort of designing the game from that aspect, like what where will players be and what will they be experiencing
Right.
at that moment, and what does that mean within the context of our game. And also, like scripting game logic stuff when I need to.
Right.
Like, there's also the nitty gritty. It's not
Yeah.
just like all like, this kind of like mind stuff. It's also like dirty work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all kind of based around like, designing the game from like a spatial and story perspective.
Definitely. Speaking of the space, how much bigger, or is it even comparable to Gone Home? Gone Home is basically just like one. If you think about it, it's like one map essentially. It's Tacoma. You're on a
Tacoma
space station,
is
right?
about Tacoma, the
Yeah.
space station.
Yeah.
So it's still like one space in that sense. But the scale of Tacoma is definitely larger than Gone Home. Now it's about more characters. Obviously, it's a space station, which is naturally bigger than a house.
Right.
But we're still, for the most part, interested in these in these people. So as far as the scale of that goes, like we're still interested in sort of individual like lives and individual stories and stuff. But obviously the company is bigger since they did Gone Home. So that naturally, the scale has become slightly larger also because of that.
And
But,
yeah. And will there be any poetry in Tacoma?
Maybe. I don't know yet.
Maybe you can like sneak it in there. And
Yeah,
Steve
maybe
won't-
I'll sneak
Steve
some in
won't
there.
see.
Yeah.
What's it like working with Steve actually? Is he kind of, I imagine sort of these like rock star game developers as like, they can be, sort of your stereotypical like, like only red M&Ms, like kind of deal. But I bet he's chiller than that.
I mean, he's just a regular guy.
Yeah.
He's just a normal guy, normcore guy. I mean, no, it's cool because like obviously Steve and Carla and also the other level designers, Tynan, they specifically Steve, Tynan, and Carla, and also Leon. Like so many people worked on BioShock in this company.
Yeah, it's crazy.
BioShock 2. But for me, like relating to them, like I haven't worked on any major AAA titles or whatever, and like I haven't even worked on a 3D game before this.
Yeah.
So on a day-to-day basis, it's just cool to have like these people that are like both my coworkers, but also my mentors because I am like learning so much from them.
Yeah.
So they're like Steve and Tynan and Carla and Leon and everyone at the company I consider them all mentors basically.
Yeah.
But specifically as far as level design goes, like Steve and Tynan have taught me so much.
Yeah.
And they're just like really good teachers. So it's been awesome working.
Do you
with
feel
them.
any pressure with that?
I mean, I think as much pressure as one would when like working on like their first like major project like this. I mean, actually, Cibele is honestly my first major project, but this is like a different scale because it's not just like me and a couple friends. It's like I'm working at Fullbright. Like I'm working on this game with a team.
Yeah.
So I guess there's
big deal.
pressure in that, but like honestly, on a day-to-day basis, it's just like I'm so focused on the game that it's hard to really like think about that.
Are there any release windows yet, or is it too early still?
Next year, but
all right.
I don't have anything specific to tell you really.
Yeah, it is all good. What last couple of questions here? What are you playing currently, or do you even have time to play games?
I am watching Emmett play Destiny right now. I've been playing a lot of Destiny, and that feels like it's all I've been playing.
Nice.
What else have I been playing? I'm like so behind on stuff because Cibele's coming out on Monday, so it's just been like working on it all the time constantly, and Destiny is a really good way to cool down, so I've been playing that sometimes at night.
Yeah.
But I haven't really had time to dive into anything for at least like a month. Mario Maker 2. Just remind me. I've been playing a lot of Mario Maker. I love that game, and Splatoon as well. Those are probably the big ones.
Can we get any Nina Freeman Mario Maker levels?
Yeah, I've made a bunch, and also like have had other game designer friends make levels on my account.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's been cool. I don't like I've tweeted the IDs, so if you go far enough back in like my picture history, you'd probably see them. I hope I'll make more soon once Cibele is shipped. Yeah. When I have time, and then I'll tweet them out again. But
very nice.
Yeah, that game's really fun.
Very cool. All right, I think that's pretty much all the time I have and all the questions I have. Thank you very much, Nina.
No problem.
Where can we follow you on the Twitters?
You can follow me on Twitter at HentaiPhD, HentaiPhD, and my site is ninasays.so. And also, everyone should go buy Cibele. which
Yes.
I guess by the time this is out on the internet, it'll be out.
It should be. Yeah.
So that's at the website cibelegame.com, and it'll be out on Steam, and all the links are there.
Sweet.
But yeah.
Yeah, Cibele's a great game. Everybody listening, please go get it because it's awesome.
Thanks.
And it's
Thank you.
It's the most. I've never played anything quite like it, and that's that's a pretty. That's the best way for me to explain it. It's awesome.
Very nice of you. Thank you. I'm glad you played it.
Yeah. All right, Nina. Thank you very much. And
sweet. Thank you.
You guys, you have a good night, and Emmett has a good night playing Destiny as well.
Yeah. Have a good one. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.